Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I want to talk about Resident Evil. It's one of my favorite franchises of all time, probably my number one favorite franchise because I am really a big fan of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2. Never got to play Resident Evil 3 original, but afterwards I played Resident Evil 4 and I thought that game was basically the bee's knees, let's just say. My talk today is basically concerning Capcom and the new direction for Resident Evil. I think that when it comes to remaking the Resident Evil games, the thing that they have done is mostly tweaking and remixing all the old beats of those games that they have remade. Those games have already been proven. They have already had quite successful runs, let's just say. So remaking those games, namely Resident Evil 2, 3, RE4, wasn't very hard to do in my opinion, because the blueprint was already there. And they basically had to retweak a few stuff here and there, of course upgrade the graphics, maybe quote unquote modernize the gameplay, and then bash everything together and voila, you have remakes. Remakes galore. I am not disparaging them for what they have done. I think so far the remakes are pretty good quality, even though Resident Evil 3 leaves a lot to be desired, but for what it is, gameplay wise, it is pretty solid. A lot of the stuff got cut out. I am not one to really compare because, like I said, I haven't really played Resident Evil 3 back in the day, so my point of reference is basically zero. Unlike most of you guys who may have played the original one, and you may think that, of course, the original stands head and shoulders above, what we got in the remake. For good reason, because there was a lot of content that was left out. Looks like the clock tower portion was completely left out. The dead factory zone was completely left out. And the boss fight with the grave digger, if I'm not mistaken, that was also left out. Also, one key gameplay mechanic, namely the live selection. I think it's called live selection, I could be wrong. That was also, left out of the game. So there's a lot of stuff that was cut from the final product, which, of course, for good reason, made a lot of people angry. And the direction that they took with RE4 remake was, basically trying to stay true to the core audience and stay true to the original experience while remixing a few stuff around, which I think worked better in the long run. And as the sales numbers show, and as people's opinion of the game show, RE4 Remake was basically a big success. I'm glad that it was like this because, Resident Evil, in my opinion, should always be, in the mainstream. And it's always great to see other people join the Resident Evil community and basically enjoy the games for what they are, That's always great. But all of this to say that I am kind of skeptical about the new direction that Resident Evil is gonna take. Now, hear me out, because Resident Evil 7, as a new entry to the series, basically revitalized it, right? And they did a bang up job doing it because they went back to the horror roots and they knew what they wanted to do and they stuck to it through the end, and the final product basically shows. Now, I'm not gonna say that the game wasn't without its faults. Obviously, there was some, in my opinion, there was some, weird pacing issues towards the end of the game, where it takes on a more actiony kind of tone, which is, I know, always the formula with Resident Evil games. They always have this actiony tone towards the end of the game, especially, if you're looking at the original trilogy or let's even say Resident Evil OG, Resident Evil 4 OG. The island section was basically, action shooter. But anyways, Resident Evil 7 revitalized the whole series. Now, Resident Evil 8 is a weird one in my opinion because if you look at that game, it's kind of like a microcosm of the early 2010s to 2015 era of Resident Evil, where they really do not know where the direction should go. So that's why they gave us Resident Evil 6, which was a mishmash of everything that they thought is going to be, appealing to the fans. I do not fault them for it. It is, you know, a definitely a direction. But Resident Evil 8, in my opinion, looks like that. It looks like that era of Resident Evil where there was no real sense of cohesion, no real sense of guidance from whoever it is guiding the project. They basically said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna mix and match a few stuff around, have a few horror elements here, have a few action elements there. We're gonna add exploration to the game. We're gonna add some RPG mechanics to the game. And we already have a good blueprint in Resident Evil 4, so why not remix that into our new game and basically add a few stuff around it and mix and match and see what we can come up with. Now, this is great, this is good, but obviously execution is part of the equation as well, which I think in Resident Evil 8 the execution really wasn't there. And in parts of the game, namely Castle Beneviento, and also the first part of the game, the first castle that you go into, which is called, I think, Castle Dimitrescu. I could probably be butchering the name, but anyways. So those two parts. Now, I know a lot of people like Castle Beneviento for the horror part, but the fact that during that whole section, they basically had to come up with a way to remove your guns from you, it just takes you away from the flow of the game, in my opinion. Now, if you had guns and you went up against that giant creepy baby, then yeah, the game would be ridiculous. But at the same time, I think the game would have benefited much more from a flow standpoint if they kind of did something else with that level. Because during that level, like I said, they're gonna force the guns away from you. Now you're basically playing a, you know, lackluster version of Outlast, basically. Because you don't have any weapons, you have to hide in lockers and stuff, and the game just takes on a whole new direction for a good 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Not gonna say that the atmosphere isn't great, the atmosphere is great. The enemy design is great. The whole section is memorable. The enemy, when the baby jumps out from the dark, is coming towards you, it's very memorable. So they did a great job with that. But that's from an aesthetic perspective. That's from an aesthetic standpoint. It's basically the artistic direction of the game which makes it stands out. But from a gameplay perspective, the fact that they had to basically restart everything that you have already accomplished up until that point, and now say, no, 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 we cannot do that here for story reasons. Now you're gonna have to go through the game like that, which to me really doesn't make any sense. And to me just reinforces the fact that there wasn't really a sense of cohesion throughout the project. Now that was one section of the game, Castle Beneviento. Like I said, for Castle Dimitrescu, well, it wasn't really the similar issue, but one other thing is that because everything is so compact in that game, they basically had to cram a lot of different areas into one game. So Castle Dimitrescu, with all of the detail that they put into it, to me when you first enter that castle, it basically screams vastness and grandeur. Whereas once you start playing in the environment, you quickly realize that this is a very linear affair. And you are basically just going to do a few things around there, grab a few items, put a few items here and there, and just be on your merry way. Take on a few bosses and be on your merry way. Basically, the three daughters, they're very linear. You just take them on one by one. Now, I don't remember exactly when and where, but it was very linear and sequential. After you take out one, after some time, you take out the other. After some time, you take out the other. And it's very fast, and the whole castle of the Dimitrescu section, just ends very fast. And again, it leaves a lot to be desired. But because they had to cram all of that into one game, they basically compromised the level of detail that could have been achieved and also the longevity of gameplay that could have been achieved. Because at first glance, that castle looks really good. It looks very good. It looks almost on par with the original Spencer Mansion or with the original RPD in that sense. They know how to make the levels. They know how to make the levels look good and feel good when you look at it. But I couldn't help but feel when you go through the level itself how linear it feels like and how on rails it is. So there's no real sense of exploration in it. The only real sense of exploration you get from Resident Evil 8 is basically the village, which is the most enjoyable part for me. And obviously why they call it Resident Evil Village, because, village takes center stage in that game. And every time you go through, each of those distinctive boss areas, let's just say, Castle Dimitrescu, Beneviento, later on you go to Moreau's swamp or whatever it is, and then towards the end you go to Heisenberg's big factory where he is basically trying to, have an assembly line of undead soldiers. But anyways, so basically, after you come back from all those areas, you come back to this hub space that changes every time. Now, this hub space itself is pretty good. Every time you, like I said, every time you come back to it, there is different enemy placement, not item placement, obviously, but it kind of has that Metroidvania feel to it because you get to unlock more stuff as you go. You get to obtain more items that can help you unlock more doors when you come back to the village. And that's the most enjoyable part, in my opinion. But again, the village is not very big, which is kind of good, in my opinion. It's not very big. But at the same time, again, after maybe once or twice coming back to it, you start to think that, okay, I have seen everything. I have pretty much done everything. The side quests, now that I think back on it, are very cookie cutter. Go take a picture, not take a picture, go hunt this crow using this picture that we have given you. Now you're gonna have to, obviously, infer from the picture where it is in the game, which obviously adds more to your playtime because you're gonna have to explore the area more, which is always a good thing. But overall, side quests and missions and side missions in a Resident Evil game, I do not know. In my opinion, I don't think it works very well. The thing that they did with Resident Evil 4 Remake, though, I think it's a nice transition from whatever they had in Resident Evil 8. But I can't help but think that these guys are just experimenting with stuff and not really coming up with anything substantial, and you're just testing the waters every time they make a new game. Maybe in Resident Evil 9 we get to see like the culmination of all these experiences put together. But it's just a series of lackluster experiences, in my opinion, when you take a look back at it, especially for Resident Evil 8. But Resident Evil 4 remake, again, because the core game, the blueprint, was already really solid, the game turned out very solid. And of course, they didn't do the same thing they did with Resident Evil 3 remake, which helped Resident Evil 4 remake. That means basically there wasn't much cut content. They respected the core material, they respected the reference and the original creator's vision to some extent, and what we got was a pretty good product. But again, back to Resident Evil 8, I think that the overall direction of the game, having those side quests and basically trying to explore and grab crafting recipes, it helps with the survival horror for sure. But again, I think the linearity of it all really diminished the experience for me. The fact that every time that you came back to the village and every time that you had to basically face a bunch of cookie cutter puzzles to solve and then go through some cookie cutter side quests to basically get some files that you can read, which added to the lore, which is kind of nice. It adds to the lore, it's always nice. But overall, I don't think it was executed properly, in my opinion. Now, that's what I mean. This all to say that I am kind of worried about the direction of the new games, because remakes are remakes, and again, they have blueprints to work off of. And they haven't remade any of their, mediocre lower quality games either. They have remade the successful ones, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and 4, which are like some of the most successful horror titles out there. Action horror title, if you want to call it that, even. Doesn't really matter. My point still stands that they basically remade the successful ones, not the ones that were mediocre, weak. Namely, Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 6, They can go for those titles. If they really want to remake something, I would say they can go for those type of titles. Now, Resident Evil 6 on its own is a decent enough game. It's a fun time if you want to play it co-op. The controls of that game are pretty nice. You can dodge, you can basically do everything. You can lie on the ground, roll on the ground while shooting. You can do some crazy stuff in that game. So in terms of its controls, it's pretty nice. We can give them that. That's not a problem. But as a Resident Evil game, if you want to be really nitpicky about it, I think it fails on multiple different levels. And the quality just isn't there as a Resident Evil game. So they didn't do that. And with the new game, with the new direction, what we have seen is basically just a mishmash of ideas, no real sense of cohesion. 7 had a good sense of cohesion. Now, one thing that encourages me, one thing that basically alleviates my concern a little bit is the fact that the director from Resident Evil 7 is also working on Resident Evil 9. And from what we have seen so far of gameplay, it has that blend of, it reminded me a little bit of PT again, mixed with Alien Isolation this time around. Or, the new Amnesia game, Amnesia the Bunker, where you have that pursuer AI that is basically following you around and responding to your movements, responding to how you play the game. So it kind of has that feel. Now, they have been very tight-lipped about the whole game. From what I have seen so far, I like it. It's just that I really hope that these sections really get to breathe a little bit more as opposed to Resident Evil 8, where it was just on rails all the time, and the little breathing room that you had when you came back to the village wasn't really all that good either, because it was filled with a bunch of nonsense side quests and lackluster puzzles, and you couldn't help but feel that you wanted more out of the game. And that's the feeling that I also get when I play Resident Evil 3 Remake, but that's besides the point. But anyways, I just hope that with Resident Evil 9, these sections get more breathing room. You can play in a little bit more. You can have more experiences in them, Because now we have a full AI, kind of like what they did with Mr. X for Resident Evil 2 Remake, and how great that guy turned out, right? So if they can do something like that and make the pursuer be able to also come into the safe room, which I think in the demo it kind of did, because the lights went out in the safe room and the pursuer was able to basically pose a threat to you in there as well. I think they have the right idea. I just hope that the production timeline, that the investors over there at Capcom realize that this is the part that makes a game a good survival horror game, and really do not need to add in these half-baked mishmash of ideas just to try to see if it can appeal to a larger audience, because Resident Evil itself has already a very dedicated fan base, and I think Resident Evil at this point in time, they can experiment a lot more than what they have already done. Basically, what they've already done is 3 remakes from, I think, from 2018 onwards. Yeah, I think from 2018 onwards, we have gotten 3 remakes and 1 new title. So that means that they are just trying to play it safe, which is not very good. But at the same time, I get it. It's a large company. They have shareholders. They have to basically, appease the shareholder gods and make money. I get it. And when I think back on it, maybe the reason that they have been experimenting a little with Resident Evil 8 and Resident Evil 4 regarding the more open-ended areas is maybe they are trying to sneakily, put in these kind of sections to see if they can play around with more open world aspects. Now I know that guy or gal or whoever, Dusk Golem, already said that Resident Evil 9 is probably going to be open world, and we already know that Raccoon City is going to come back in some way, shape, or form. You're going to probably explore the ruins of Raccoon City in an open environment, in an open world setting. So I'm guessing they were just experimenting all these years with these little games to kind of tie everything together. Now that they have all of this experience, now they can basically create a better game, hopefully, with the culmination of everything that they have learned so far developing RE8 and Resident Evil 4 remake. But yeah, I hope it turns out well enough. I hope it turns out good enough that while we're playing it, we're not thinking, oh, this could have lasted a lot longer. I wish this could have lasted a lot longer. I wish this was better. I wish that was better. Because that was my entire feeling when I was playing Resident Evil 8 and Resident Evil 3 Remake. 4, not so much. 4, they tried to basically do everything by the book. Like I said, they respected the reference material, and, the sales numbers show. But anyways, I hope that the direction for Resident Evil 9 is solid. I hope that there is minimal interference from the shareholders to cram everything that they can in order to, again, appeal to a larger audience. Resident Evil has always been survival horror. I know Resident Evil 4 is also one of my favorites, like I said, But even in that game, just playing with the positioning of the character and also managing your resources, that added that survival element to it. Horror, not so much. Maybe the parts where the regenerators, I'm talking about the original, maybe the parts with the regenerators or the Novistadors had that horror tone and sense to them. But the other parts of the game were not very horror-ish, let's just say. So, but overall, Resident Evil, in my opinion, has always been like that. And Resident Evil 5 and 6 just completely went off the rails with the general atmosphere and the general horror tone and the survival aspects. As action games, like I said, they're decent on their own. As action games, they're fine. But as a survival horror game, they leave a lot to be desired. And I remember playing Resident Evil 5, and at the time, I really liked the graphics, I really liked the gameplay as well. But again, there was just that nagging feeling of where have all that atmosphere gone? Where is the horror? Why do I have a partner? Why is there sun out? And I know we're playing in Africa, and of course Africa is a hot country and the sun's always out, and not always, but I know those aspects kind of factor into the environment and everything. But at the same time, I think it was such a large departure from what Resident Evil 4 offered that I was very disappointed at the end. Even though I liked the game, I liked it for what it was. It was, again, decent action game. It kind of had the same beats as Resident Evil 4 as well, where you would see similar enemies. For example, in the case of, the Chainsaw Magini, of course we have Dr. Salvador in RE4 with his chainsaw, right? And there was on-rail section as well, with the basically with the chase scene that happens across the savannah, and you have to shoot down the Magini who are following you on their dirt bikes and also on their trucks, which was a cool section. And then you had to go fight the El Gigante of the Maginis. I don't remember what it was called. But even that section left a lot to be desired, because in Resident Evil 4 you actually were more hands-on with the boss fight. You basically had to fight him on foot, but in Resident Evil 5 you have to fight the guy behind the turret on your jeep, on your basically truck, on your military truck or whatever it was. So even in that sense, it failed, in my opinion. And a lot of tension was gone because you already had a partner following you around throughout the whole level, throughout the whole game. Of course, there was a little bit of tension when the partners kind of got separated from each other and you had to cover your partner or vice versa, which created these tense moments. Again, as an action game, as a co-op shooter, it's great. It's a phenomenal experience. It's a decent game, you know? But again, as a Resident Evil fan, I would not consider that to be 100% Resident Evil, because when you see the title, you are expecting a few things to follow that title, if you know what I mean. So there was little to no item management, there was little to no horror, there was little to no survival. It's just go through the levels, upgrade your weapons. There wasn't even a merchant in that game. It was just a series of menus that you had to navigate through to upgrade your weapons. So a lot of the charm was lost in Resident Evil 5. But again, it was also one of the best-selling titles of the franchise. So that means they did something right, which was, the pure action side of it, which led to Resident Evil 6, which was, we all know how that game turned out. So, at the end of the day, all of this to say that I hope Resident Evil 9 has learned from his past mistakes. I hope Capcom is again not trying to appeal to a larger audience, because we can also get into what they have done regarding Monster Hunter. Now, I haven't played Monster Hunter Wilds. I have played Monster Hunter World. I am not a Monster Hunter aficionado, but from what I have heard is that Monster Hunter Wilds is a whole lot easier than Monster Hunter World. And they have done it because, again, they wanted to appeal to a larger fan base, which, again, from a financial standpoint makes sense, but from a gameplay standpoint, if you're trying to do that, then you're gonna lose your core audience. Now, if that's their gimmick going forward with Resident Evil, then I'm afraid that we're just gonna get subpar Resident Evil games which cannot basically touch the original ones, right? Again, they have been just remaking when it comes to Resident Evil, at least. They have just been remaking stuff. One new title since 2018. So I hope this new one at least tries to break new ground and doesn't get mired in the whole larger audience thing and, the other stuff that basically comes with working at a big corporation like Capcom. And I think one other good thing that Capcom did was Street Fighter 6. People do say that Street Fighter 6 is pretty good. I haven't played that game yet. I'm more of a Tekken guy, but I will have to try Street Fighter as well because I did try Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 3, Alpha, and Street Fighter 2. So I've tried those games, but I never tried 6. And from what I'm hearing, looks like Capcom has really, again, managed to wow the fans. So they do have the pedigree, they do have, the talent, the know how to make good games. I just don't know sometimes what happens during production, during pre production. I just don't know what happens, what type of interference that they have to deal with that sometimes leads to these projects, these products that are not, that are not very good, that leave a lot to be desired. But hey, that was my rant. I hope I didn't bore you guys out with my voice. Uh, I am fairly new to this. I'm actually very new to this. So bear with me here. We're gonna see what's gonna happen. I'm gonna do a playthrough of Resident Evil 3 Remake as well, and it's gonna be up on the channel too. And we're gonna have more videos coming up, hopefully soon. Yeah, we're gonna see how it goes. And if you stuck this far, I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Just being able to talk to the Resident Evil community at large. Of course, I play other games as well, so we're gonna talk about other games too. I'm thinking about talking about Callisto Protocol and why I think that game is also really good, even though it got a lot of flack when it came out. Um, but yeah, anyways, that's besides the point. What I was saying is, it's always nice to be engaging with the community, with the Resident Evil community, because I mean, you guys are the best, and yeah, it just encourages. It's very encouraging for me to be able to create this content and put it out, and get some interaction as well, and see what you guys think about it too. If you think that Resident Evil 8 was great or it was bad, please let me know down in the comments. I would welcome it. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer it as well. Yeah, guys, so that's basically it. Thanks for sticking out this long. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video, hopefully. See you guys. Catch you guys later. Bye.